March the 17th, 1887, a triple murder gripped the attention of the entire country of France when the body of a woman, aged around 40, was discovered in her flat on the Rue Montaigne in the Lower Champs-Élysées, which was a gentrified quarter of Paris frequented by Parisian elites and wealthy visitors to the city. The first victim was Marie Regnault, who went under the name of Regine de Montiel, was found gruesomely murdered in her apartment. A second body, of a middle-aged woman who was her housekeeper, Annette Gromeret, was found in a nearby bedroom, along with the housekeeper's daughter, who was about 12 years old. All of the victims being killed in a particularly brutal manner, with some sort of knife, and the child's head was almost completely severed from her body. Regnault's business was that of a courtesan, a high-class prostitute who had an exclusive clientele, making the incident in the Rue Montaigne the latest in a string of murders among similar women, dating back at least 2 years. The furnishings in the apartment, together with a collection of original paintings on the walls, pointed to her being successful in what she did. A collection of calling cards made it clear that her clients included some wealthy and influential men. A triple homicide, sexual intrigue, and a foreign-born suspect, the murders in the Rue Montaigne possessed all the makings of a sensational story, destined to enthrall a French public hungry for scandal and gossip. Among the visiting cards found in the apartment was one from Enrico Pranzini, someone who, as it turned out, had a colourful and a shady background. He was born in 1856 in the Egyptian port city of Alexandria to Italian parents. He did, though, identify with the Islamic Ottoman Empire, which he saw as his true spiritual homeland. To those in Paris, he was an Arab-speaking Levantine, a mixture of both East and West, which in their eyes was seen as inferior to the French. Before settling in Paris, he had travelled quite extensively and spoke a number of different languages fluently, working at one time as an interpreter for the Russian army during disputes with Turkey over territorial claims. He had also been an interpreter with the British Army in Sudan and Afghanistan. Various commercial dealings came and went. He had lived in India and was convicted of stealing when he was employed by the Egyptian Postal Service, which led to a 9-month spell in prison. During later police investigations, some people claimed to have been swindled and conned by Pranzini when they had business relationships with him. He was well known as being very much a ladies' man and known to cultivate friendships with wealthy older women. There were also other allegations, including one of male prostitution when necessity demanded it, all of which no doubt matched suspicions about the moral degeneracy of Middle Eastern and Latin American people, which were all looked down on by many people in Paris. Initially, Pranzini wasn't considered a suspect in the murders. Some clues at the scene of the crime appeared to point to other possible killers. Cufflinks found in the apartment had the initials GG, as did a belt, and were linked to Gaston Giesler. He was traced to a cheap hotel in the Paris suburbs, but had already left when police arrived to arrest him. A confrontation with the hotel manager about an unpaid bill had led to Giesler leaving his belongings behind when he left. The police thought he might return, but details of his name and the hotel were printed in newspapers and may have alerted him to the fact that he was being looked for. Pranzini had left Paris for Marseille a couple of days after the bodies had been discovered, where he registered at a hotel under the name of Dr. E. Pranzini, Swedish doctor. It was later reported in the press that he visited a local brothel. He offered to sell them some jewellery, which aroused the owner's suspicions, and the local police were called and he was arrested. What particularly interested the police when they searched his belongings was a bag containing a quantity of love letters packed alongside some female pieces of clothing and bespoke feminine handkerchiefs. It helped to convince the police that he was a gigolo, whose distinguished features and worldliness enabled him to seduce well-to-do women and then prevail upon them to part with their money and valuables. He was quite open about his involvements and described his lifestyle, ignoring how it would look to people, and insisted that this did not mean that he was a murderer or involved in any way with the events in the Rue de Montaigne. With the triple murder, the funeral, and the subsequent auction of Regnault's possessions, it is not surprising that this aroused a great deal of interest among the public in general. Elite prostitution thrived on networks that brought sex workers to Paris from various parts of the world, with exotic women often fetching a high price at the high-end maison de rendezvous that typically facilitated sexual encounters in the city. The women concerned often acquired expensive collections of jewelry, art, and luxury items from clients. Their net worth sometimes rivaled the top income earners in the country. The newspapers, both in France and abroad, reported in detail what could be gleaned about her life, and there were suggestions that the young girl, also known as Marie, may not have been the housekeeper's daughter at all, but Regnault's. She had been kept away from whatever business the courtesan transacted in her apartment, and was sent to a good school for education, and interestingly, the will named the girl as the sole beneficiary. The Paris police found out from a reporter that Pranzini was being held in Marseille, which led to the impression that the investigation was disorganized. Compared to what exists today, the resources that were available to the police in the 19th century were limited, and it was not uncommon for the police to arrive at a crime scene after the press had. Once he was brought back to Paris, Pranzini was interrogated by the investigating magistrate. He was asked if he'd ever met Regnault. He then admitted knowing her, but claimed that their relationship had nothing to do with sex. He probably couldn't have afforded to pay for her favours anyway. So what were his reasons for visiting her? He'd obviously noticed that her apartment was luxuriously furnished, so she clearly had money. So perhaps he was hoping to charm her out of some of it. There had been a series of murders of courtesans in the past. Pranzini had not been in the city when they were committed, so police attempts to pin them on him did not happen. Whatever else he had done or not, there was no evidence that he had ever used violence in the past, and certainly not the sort used for the murders. Pranzini himself claimed to have been with a society woman on the night of the murders, but refused to name her. The case and dramatic trial brought out national anxieties that exposed the darker side of the Age of Empire. Following his arrest, Pranzini became a symbol of the many perceived threats the nation faced, whether as a foreign immigrant, a curious Oriental, or a case study criminology emerging at the time. The evidence against him was circumstantial, and this caused the prosecution making his character, and being a Levantine, a centerpiece of the trial, actively whipping up fears regarding foreign infiltration. And they used the trial to illustrate the dangers posed by foreigners, while authorities and the prosecution employed colonial stereotypes related to criminalized behavior and sexual deviance to emphasize the accused's guilt. The racial and class odds were stacked against him. After all, he was an Egyptian, not a French colonial subject, and the xenophobia were reactions to early globalization and security concerns. Prejudice was rife in the Third Republic. Pranzini's trial proceedings sometimes got close to being farce. The judge was biased from the start, reading out some of the love letters, highlighting his reputation as a gigolo, referred to as the saddest means to get by, and belittling any efforts to mount a defense. Pranzini had been living with a woman named Antoinette Sabatier, a respectable woman in steady employment as a milliner, who was some years older than he was. At first, she told the police that her partner was at home with her on the night in question, but after being questioned further, possibly under duress, when the police threatened to charge her as an accessory, she retracted her statement. Some who worked in the millinery trade, which was notoriously low paid, were pushed into turning to prostitution to earn money. There is no suggestion that Sabatier was in any way involved. She had a good job at the shop where she worked and appeared to earn enough to support herself and Pranzini as well, it would seem. The circumstantial evidence against him, for example, the calling card that was found in the apartment, his contradictions about his whereabouts, his rapid journey to Marseille after the crime was discovered, and having valuables probably from Regnault's apartment in his possession, persuading his lover to pawn some jewellery so he could buy a rail ticket out of Paris, looked damning enough. But it may be that what finally clinched his guilt in the eyes of the jury was Antoinette Sabatier's testimony from the witness box. She was in love with Pranzini and always maintained her views that he was not a killer, but under oath, she said that he hadn't been at home on the night of the murders, and that he admitted to her that he had been present in Regnault's apartment when they took place. His story was that he was visiting when another of Regnault's clients arrived. She had panicked and told Pranzini to hide in a large wardrobe in the corridor. When he emerged from his hiding place, he found the 3 dead females. It seemed an unlikely story, especially as other tenants in the building testified that they had heard noises, something dropping to the floor, hideous cries, so Pranzini would have been aware of them. He also denied that he'd ever told Sabatier anything about being in Regnault's apartment at the time, so it was inevitable that he was found guilty and sentenced to death, being guillotined on the 31st of August, and there was a large crowd present to watch the spectacle. His body was then dissected, with the parts going to various medical schools and other institutions. Was it possible that since he came originally from Egypt, have some bearing on the way he was vilified? The French had been humbled in Egypt when they lost any influence they had to Britain. There had been an uprising against Europeans in Alexandria, and the British quickly bombarded the city, seized the port, and effectively took control of the country. Were French resentments of their being pushed into second place in the colonial contest, together with the fear of foreigners, responsible for how the judge portrayed him as a man of low origins from a foreign country who had pretensions above his status and was able to seduce French women to further his ends. There was later a dark scandal when it became known that some policemen had decorative visiting card cases made out of strips of Pranzini's skin. It led, in turn, to the resignation of President Jules Grévy when a senior policeman, in an act of revenge for being pilloried as one of the offending officers, released information about the activities of the president's son-in-law. There were references to a prostitution ring and to a trade in honours and medals for money at the Ministry of War.